Lesson 2, the emerging cross-functional role of commercial enablement and the need for more cross-functional support. When you think about all the things we've been talking about in this particular module, it's really about bringing the right people together at the right time, but not just to coordinate and hit dates, but to create something together. In the space of digital transformation and interconnection, it's really important to think about where value is created and how value is unleashed in the organization. When we talked about the job description in the last lesson, we talked about pipeline enablement, message enablement, and talent enablement. There are 2 other areas of enablement, domains of enablement. Another is organizational enablement, focused on simplifying the business processes that support sales conversations, like deal desk and deal reviews and pricing, and even onboarding from a corporate perspective. And then there's commercial enablement. Commercial enablement is about orchestrating the orchestrators to improve the commercial ratio through targeted growth programs in partnership with sales, marketing, and operations. I'll talk more about the commercial ratio in another lesson. If you want to know more about it right now, you can look up commercialratio.com. It's one of the things that Scott's working on. Scott Santucci is working on in his work with venture capital companies. So the vision is that commercial enablement becomes the VP of sales productivity to drive the commercial ratio across pipeline enablement, message enablement, talent enablement, organizational enablement, and commercial enablement. That creates a cross-functional need to bring together a lot of different capabilities inside your company with the singular goal of simplifying sales conversations. Obviously, this is easier said than done, especially in a new role like what we're experiencing here in commercial enablement. So where does this come from? Is this just a vision? Is it a pipe dream? Or is this reality? Well, let's take a look at what's happening around us, in the world around us, in the business landscape. And just ask yourself a simple question. How interconnected is today's world? And where is this value being created? Is it in isolation or is it in connection? Which kind of companies are powering the business world, that are powering the economy? Which kind of companies? And what's changing? Well, these are platform companies. They're companies like Amazon and Facebook and Microsoft and others that are driving cross-functional, interconnected, global platforms. So when you think about it, there's a fundamental shift in how we think about working together. It's one thing to say we're interconnected. It's another to say we're creating value and synergy across these interconnected ecosystems. And how we get work done is different today. Because of that, there are new business models and new operating models to support them. Companies are learning to compete in the interconnected world. They're learning to bring platforms together. There are companies bringing platforms together. So these companies require not only new strategies to reach their customers, but new pricing structures and even new operating models. Because of that, roles have to evolve. And this creates a lot of challenges for us as orchestrators. A lot of the roles that we deal with and work with and partner with on a daily basis are built from, and a legacy of the Industrial Revolution. I'll explain more about that, but if you look at how work is broken down today, work is delegated and the org chart is the primary way in which the work is chunked up. So roles need to think differently about how they add value, not job titles, but roles. So what is a role? And then if individuals in critical roles can't evolve, the company can't grow, and neither can you. And as a result of that, it makes it difficult to close the gaps to customers, especially when it's almost impossible to explain how to buy the interconnectedness of today's digital economy. So these gaps create opportunities for salespeople, they create opportunities for leadership, and they create opportunities for you as an orchestrator. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. Let me try to make this more concrete. The CEO says, look, we've got a new strategy. We've got to get more productivity from our sales force. We need more bookings. The CFO says, yes, let's do that. And also make sure we keep our cost of sales low. We need to maintain our margins, make sure we look good on the balance sheet for our investors. And as a result of that, executives in sales, marketing, HR, portfolio, and other groups all say, that sounds great. I'll get my team right on that. And the work begins. When that happens, because the work is delegated that way from the top, sales executives, sales managers, and salespeople get going. IT executives, managers, and individual contributors get moving. Services executives, managers, and individual contributors get moving. Product executives, managers, and individual contributors get started. Marketing executives, leaders, and managers, and individual contributors get going. And the people in finance and HR get moving as well. Mm-hmm. So what happens when those organizations, those divisions, those departments start executing on their yearly goals? Well, what usually happens is without a shared goal setting process and shared outcomes, you end up very easily and quickly into a silo first mentality based on what we've known before, what our department needs to achieve, and we end up hoarding resources and hardwiring our existing bias. Now, this is not on purpose, but this is how the organization's set up. It feels very natural to do it this way. Now, when I'm showing you this, though, it may not make a lot of sense, but it's the reality. In fact, think about all the certifications in finance. Think of all the certifications in marketing. There are over 40 different types of certifications you can get in marketing. Think about the certifications and degrees in product and engineering, IT. Think about the certifications, degrees, and credentialing that happens in the individual silo. Who's getting certified on customers? Who's getting certified on conversations to communicate value? Who's getting certified on creating the customer experience? This is the challenge of today because most business strategies require that level of understanding in order to sell to executives and client companies. So where does that come from? Well, a lot of it's falling on the backs of salespeople right now, especially key account executives and strategic account leaders that have to deal with these silos on a daily basis. So what it looks like is leadership needs to lead differently. Engineering needs to innovate differently. Marketing needs to market differently. Sales needs to sell differently. Customers are evolving, and that's driving all that. And it might be easy to point at those groups and say they need to adjust and they need to change and they need to evolve. But what about you? What about you and your role? And that's the key of being here in this class. It's really awesome that you're here and you recognize that evolution is required. And what you'll find is you'll be equipped to drive that evolution, and you'll be having these tools and techniques that you're developing so that you can help elevate and shift the capabilities of your company to meet customer expectations. As you do that, you'll start seeing friction. And friction's a natural part of the job. Friction will happen, people will disagree, people will have different perspectives, and that's okay. You don't have to create groupthink and consensus to get there. What you want to do is use tools and frameworks and approaches that I'll teach you in these courses to help navigate. There's a way to get it done, and there's a way to do that, and it has to do with connecting the dots and being an orchestrator. And one way to think about it is, what if we fast forward? Do we think that the org chart eventually will give way to something more customer centric? I do. And I think it'll be driven by technology and platforms. Absolutely. But let's look at what's happening today and how expensive it is. When all these groups get going and they all start their actions and activities, they create a lot of stuff. They fill up a lot of jars with win-loss reviews and competency models and training and the QBR process and reporting and pricing changes and playbooks, et cetera. And on the individual level, that might look good. And you may notice some duplication here. That's by design. A lot of stuff gets duplicated in this view. It's very expensive. Very, very expensive. But what happens when a cross-functional objective comes along, an outcome, like we talked about in an earlier lesson? That outcome is we need salespeople to get access to CIOs. Can sales do it by themselves? No, it requires a blend of all these functions. What about launching product, launching a new tool? It requires a little bit from everybody. What about transforming go-to-market? All these functions have a role to play. And streamline account planning, all these functions have a role as well. And who's managing that? And who's bringing it all together? You may say, well, that's somebody else's job. We have a central planning organization for that, or we have the strategy office. Well, that's usually one or two people. And they struggle with the execution side, which is where you come in, because strategy and execution together are required to drive forward. What about if we fast forward 20 years and think about the org chart giving way to something else? What would it be? Well, we still would need these capabilities. I'm not saying that those capabilities and skills are not required. And we still would have outcomes to drive, such as revamping account planning or launching new product or new sales training, gaining access, et cetera. But what if we were able to figure out a way to staff and fund cross-functional teams that a little bit of everybody comes together to drive those outcomes? What would that look like? And how would that work? In essence, that's what you're trying to do as an orchestrator today, is to create this fabric of skills and people all working together. The shared goal, shared purpose, shared vision, shared understanding. And they all have their specific individual biases and hardwiring in their silos. So you have to help people understand what's happening and why. For example, sales might say, well, we are cross-functional. We have a lot of sales leaders that get together and figure out account planning. And we all get together and come around the table and we do account planning. The question is does product have a point of view about how to position? What about marketing or IT or even services? Do they have a role to play in supporting accounts? Right? It might be easier to just have sales have the discussion, but where's everybody else? Right? So this is an example of some of the shifts that'll be happening. They're probably, I know they're happening right now. I've seen this happen. They'll start accelerating over the next 2 years. And this is why orchestrating is critical, because you've got to move from silos to an interconnected view. It's not about people, process, information, and technology in a silo. It's about connecting the dots. So when you think about that, somebody might be like, that's great. It makes a lot of sense. But what you're talking about is really project management. I mean, that's what project managers do, right? They bring everybody together and they hit milestones. Aren't you just an overlay, and aren't you just a project manager then? If you are talking that way, how would you answer that? How would you answer what's the difference between project management and orchestration? Well, a project manager would be focused on how to get something done, usually against a timeline. Whereas a orchestrator is focused on what are we doing and why are we doing it? They're more concerned about that, not how to do it to implement against a timeline and a deadline. When you think about project management, they're focused on operating and operationally biased to get stuff done. And usually it's against a date or a deadline, and they focus on hitting time, budget, and quality because there's limited resources. So they're about coordinating and making sure everybody's aware and following up that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. An orchestrator is focused on where are we going? How do we anticipate where we're going? How do we clarify the outcomes and make sure we know what we need to get there? How do we help people be more proactive in what we're doing and not just reactive? How do we understand what we're doing and why we're doing it in the first place? And how do we bring those right people together who want to make the right kind of impact and understand that it's about quality, not necessarily hitting a deadline? In my role as a consultant, I'm often lucky enough to work on projects that have deadlines. And it's interesting, when I first come in, I ask, hey, what's the deadline? And I usually get the deadline and I say, well, where did it come from? And most people have no idea where the actual deadline came from. But if you were to back trace the deadline, you would find that somebody made a call based on what they thought would be required. And that deadline is really a false deadline. It's arbitrarily set based on what somebody thinks should happen. And actually, most deadlines, 80 to 90% of them, are set with the goal of applying pressure to help people prioritize. So we'll create a crisis and we'll create pressure so that people prioritize. So there's not a lot of proactive in sales and marketing, and we're wired to react in sales and marketing. So the challenge with orchestrating is to move into something that's more proactive, to understand what and why, and to figure out if those dates are legit and real, or more importantly, to figure out what to do to drive quality. Even if you drive it on time, how do you help get salespeople what they really need, not just what somebody wants? What do salespeople really need? So you need an integrated, holistic, engineered approach. You need to be heroic, like we talked about in the first module. So bringing those things together provides clarity and direction. So that sounds conceptual, but how do you make some decisions at the keyboard in your role? There's a lot to figure out. And I was struggling with this mightily, and reached out to Scott. I said, it feels like I'm stuck in the middle, stuck between strategy and tactics. And the world around me is very tactical and operational. And I know I need to be focused on something that's a little bit more strategic. And there's not a lot of support for that. What do I do? And he said, well, maybe you don't think about it as stuck in the middle between the two. Maybe you think about it as two different games that you're playing on the same day. And I thought that was really insightful. So if I were to ask you to think about a game, it's an outdoor game. It's played in a stadium. There's a ball. There's referees. There are players. There are coaches. There are points scored. It's played on grass. There are cheerleaders. There are set periods of time. There are playoffs, overtime. What kind of game am I explaining? Which game would you pick? Well, if you're in the US, you'd say, well, that sounds an awful lot like American football. If you're outside the US, you would say probably it sounds an awful lot like football/soccer. And that's the thing. I use the exact same terms that could be applied in both games. Same terminology, two different games. And that's what it feels like being an orchestrator. You have to be very clear and very disciplined on how to connect those dots for people, on what game you're really playing. So what is the operational game? Well, the operational game is focused on how, leading with how. How does it get done? When does it get done? What's the best practice we can use? What is everybody else doing? Who's going to do it? When do we get it done on time? I'm in my boundary. I'm in my box. I can do this. And it's very much get stuff done. The innovation game feels completely different. The innovation game is about, what are we doing? What's our objective? Why are we doing it this way and not some other way? Who is the beneficiary of what we're doing? Now that's an interesting one. Think about it on the operations side is who's going to get stuff done. On the innovation side, it's about who is the recipient, who's going to benefit from what we're doing. When is about ongoing impact, not a point in time. And then asking, not how does it get done, but how is this going to work? And thinking about it in terms of the ecosystem. Two different games. One is operations, one is innovation. Two different games, same kind of language. Makes it difficult, but hopefully this analogy makes things more clear. You'll have to operate in both games. You may be playing the operation game 70% of your time, but make sure you're spending the time getting better on the innovation game. And that's exactly what I did. I was very, very, very disciplined on trying to spend at least 30% of my time on the innovation game. So call me and drop me a line if that's what you're doing. It's not easy, but it can be done. And you start learning how to operate on both planes. You can do both at once if you're disciplined. So what does that look like? Well, I built a checklist for myself, a scorecard. And I would ask myself, what am I doing and what am I focused on? It wasn't perfect, but it helped me start thinking about the two different games. But just like anything, it requires consistent practice in order for it to become a habit. It also is hard because most of the inputs I was getting was on the operation game. Here at Orchestrate Sales, we want your inputs to be on the right side, on the innovation game. We're going to be very intentional about creating a community and providing inputs on what it means to navigate in the VUCA world that we talked about to connect the dots and orchestrate. As you go through the scorecard exercise, I want you to pause and take a moment here to do that exercise. I've been talking a lot in this module, so pause the video and I want you to go through the exercise of marking the left and the right side and asking yourself where you spend your time. And then do yourself a favor and make sure you're protecting your time like I asked you to in an earlier module. Pause the video here and I want you to reflect on the Innovate Operate game. Use this scorecard here and check your calendar to make sure you're protecting your Innovate time. Okay, welcome back. So in this lesson, the key takeaways were your role is evolving, not just because you want to change your title, but because the economy is shifting and we're in an interconnected world. Some say we're in the fourth industrial revolution. I believe we're in the first digital revolution. And this is a tectonic shift in how people think and work. It's an exciting time. Commercial enablement is evolving to be the first ever purely cross-functional role in an ecosystem world. So you have to free your mind, and you also have to think about how you do that and what it means to be successful and what techniques you need. In order to be successful, you're going to have to elevate your initiatives and start running complex initiatives in the ecosystem view. So think about how you influence that and get in early around those initiatives. And always remember, there's a difference between the operation game and the innovation game. Choose your time wisely and make the right decisions about how you use your time and where you put your energy to make sure you're spending the right time to achieve the outcomes you need for your strategy. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. I'll see you in the next lesson, lesson 3.